Hey guys, it's Sam here. I'm back for the first new releases in quite some time. And it's a hell of a week to come back for new releases because so much good shit came out this week. Honestly, I had a super good time digging through all this shit to find these great albums for you guys. I've got 6 albums to talk about today, and I've got a couple of honorable mentions as well, because there was just so much good shit coming out. There's a lot of stuff that I really could have mentioned on this list, but I just had to cut for the sake of time, or just because I felt it didn't measure up to the other things, and I don't want to include stuff that's good, but I feel it'll be overshadowed. The first album that I have to talk to you guys about today is number 6 on the list, and that is Festering Anti-Cosmic Wounds by Buddhist. This isn't straightforward like black death metal. This has got like a whole bunch of noisy elements kind of added in there, and it's like enough to make it sound like this album is just a swirling vortex of some kind of like infernal hatred going on. Like, this is some kind of hurricane of an album. It came out on the 19th, so this was like the very first day of the new releases window this week, and these guys are super similar to Impetuous Ritual, and I love Impetuous Ritual, so I was super hyped to hear this album. This is just, like I said, it's a hurricane of an album. It feels like you're being sucked down into this like whirlpool of decaying body parts of all kinds of different species, and that's really what I feel like they were going for on this album, so it seems they've really hit their target. And the reason I say that this is what they were going for is actually because of a lyric that's in the album. On the album they talk about a 13-headed abomination comprised of every species known. That's from the title track, and like that kind of gives you a really good idea of the type of atmosphere that they're going for here. Just this really deranged, kind of like riffy but noisy but completely chaotic black death metal. Just a trip from beginning to end, and this is one of those things that gives you like this kind of sonic whiplash after you're finished listening to the album. It's just, you have to take a minute and kind of sit down and just listen to the silence for a while before you can recharge yourself enough for the next album you're gonna listen to. Honestly, it was a great listen, tons of energy, and also just like this really creepy kind of chaotic atmosphere, as well as just dirty and gritty, and I love it. It ends as violently as it started. They don't bother with an intro, they don't bother with an outro. Honestly, it's just pure chaos right from the first second the album starts all the way to the end. These guys are not here to waste your time. They get right down to business, they rip your head off and throw it in a fucking blender, and that's the album. So if you like that kind of shit, if it sounds appealing to you, you're probably just as fucked up as me. Anyways, the next album that I'm gonna talk about today is A Plague in the Heart of Light by Leeches, which I've actually seen a couple other people talking about this since it came out. This band has members of Buddhist and they're from Greece. This is their first release, and what you're gonna find on this record is a lot of old school Norway, little tiny touch of crust here and there, and then as well these like absolutely deranged vocals. You guys probably know the kind I'm talking about, where there's just a little more voice in it, and it kind of reminds me a lot of the Mysterious era Mayhem with Attila on vocals. The kind of vocals that sound like a cat coughing up a hairball. I love that like deranged kind of expelling a demon from your body type of vocals, and I would really love to hear that more often. So it was really refreshing to hear that on this album, on top of these like super gritty, like riffy black metal parts that were kind of like sandwiched in between these kind of more dungeon synthy type of keyboard kind of things. This is a release that really has a natural progression to it, and it is pretty short, but it's well put together, and I would have loved more. So that's A Plague in the Heart of Light by Leeches. My album number 4 is In Communion with Death by Barrier. This is actually his first full-length album. He's got 2 demos that came out before this. This full-length album is kind of like the end product of the process of those first 2 demos. He's really getting a grip on kind of what he wants to be as a project, and it's really nice when you can finally hear like this band that's got a great idea and they're finally coming together and putting out this consolidated force of an album that just sounds like what they wanted to be with no compromises. And that's what this one is. It really feels like Barrier's coming into his own on this, which was really great to hear, because I think this is a project that has a lot of potential. What you'll find on this album is cold, raw black metal about death and burial and decay and rot and all of those lovely things. You will also find that this is a really long album. This is about 80 minutes, it's absurdly long, and in most cases that's something that I would consider to be too long for an album, but this one is kind of different because although it is really raw and it's got some great riffs on it, and it is fairly intense at some parts, it's also very trance-like, and it's something that you can really get locked into and you can really focus on it for a longer period of time because it does give you time to breathe. This is what I like to call a session album. Don't listen to this piece by piece, just sit down, devote some time to it, light some candles, do whatever you gotta do, take whatever substances you gotta take, and just get through it end to end, and it's a really rewarding experience if you do it that way. It's also got a really interesting atmosphere. The instrumentation is like really gritty and clipping, and it sounds like it's coming through an AM radio with really bad reception, but it's also got these deeper, crystal clear, like melodic passages that are kind of underneath all of that. These melodies are like almost aquatic. They're like, the production on them is really wet, but at the same time it fits with these also like gritty and kind of muffled passages that are above it. And the effect that this creates is kind of like you're cracking through a barrier between this world and the underworld. It's really fitting because this is just all about death and decay and burial. It really feels like you're kind of on the borderline between worlds here. Like, I feel like if you were having a near-death experience, this type of shit would be playing in the background. Or at least if it was, that would mean that whoever's up there has great taste in music, because this album is sick and I highly recommend it. Alright, number 3 on my list is Eka by Abhaza. This was actually first released back in November of 2019, but it's been re-recorded and re-released. I feel like they just rearranged some of the songs. This isn't technically a new release, I know, don't get on my ass about it. It came out in 2019 for the first time, I know that. I didn't find it last year in time, and so this is new to me. This one is the most trance-like album here. The genre on this one is really difficult to pin down. It's very atmospheric and kind of ambient as well in some parts, but it's mostly very, very droning, very repetitive. It's kind of funeral doomy as well, but at the same time I've heard people talking about this online and calling it black metal, and that's not really something I would entirely disagree with, honestly. This one's a little bit all over the place. I have not found a description of this that's fully satisfied me. It's just one of those things that kind of evades description in a lot of ways, a lot of very good ways. So put this on with a substance of your choice and have fun. The album title is actually number 1 in the Devanagari script, and that makes sense because this is the first album from this project, and it's all about Eastern philosophy, and for that reason you'll hear a lot of meditation bells and other things from that kind of theme coming into this music here. And these guys are from the USA, but honestly I have no idea which part of the US they're from. Honestly, I can't find out much about these guys. They're quite secretive. Number 2 on my list is Fetishistic Adoration of Death by Fetishism. And this is another band that I've been having like a fucking hard time finding information on. There is nothing out there about them. They are extremely mysterious. The only thing I know is they're from Germany. And this was apparently recorded back in 2012 and released now. As far as I know, it's the band's first release, but that's the most information I can find. I love this kind of shit. I love when bands are mysterious like this, but at the same time it really pisses me off because I want to find out more. This album is like really oppressive atmosphere, and it's ritualistic, and it's like a fever dream. There's a lot going on here that I haven't fully processed yet. The atmosphere just feels like hostile to life, and it's one of those things that you feel like you're doing something profoundly wrong when you're listening to it. Like you feel like your soul is in trouble or some kind of shit. Again, this is a session album. Light candles, do whatever you gotta do. Allow yourself the cheesiness or the cringe or whatever you feel you want to call it in order to make yourself feel big and mature, but we all know that deep down secretly you love it. The vocals remind me of old propaganda footage or old propaganda broadcasts from like the 1940s. The way that they're produced is just so mysterious and dark and evil, and I love it. This is just one of those things that like I felt dizzy after I listened to it. I talked about Sonic Whiplash a little bit earlier, and I totally got that after this one too. That's the stuff that really leaves an impression on you. I think that's what you should aim for, regardless of the genre you play. If you're putting out an album and your listeners have to take a minute after the album and collect themselves before they can listen to more music, like that's just fucking amazing that you can do that. It's something special when it happens. It's a sign that you just went through something profound and that it really connected with you. And that brings me to my number 1 on this list. Ice-Cold Gales Bash Against the Walls of My Subconscious by Iberna. This album is atmospheric black metal, and it's just one of those demos that's like super bone-chilling and cold, and you can feel it. It's really short, it's only 2 tracks, and if I remember correctly, it's under 20 minutes. But it's a really wet production on this album, like tons of flange. That gives it a really ethereal and really soft feeling. But at the same time, it's muffled, and like that's a really interesting juxtaposition as well. You kind of got a really similar situation here that's going on with Barrier. And that really gives the album a really interesting feeling to it because it gives it layers and it gives it a lot of depth. and that's what I'm looking for. That's the kind of shit I can get into. I'm a QCBM fan, what can I say? I'm gonna love this. This demo makes me nostalgic for my childhood, honestly. I'm Canadian, I grew up here, born and raised. I grew up where it was colder and there was more snow in the winter, and I spent my childhoods running through fields and snowstorms and lying on the ground, and the snow just makes that perfect cushion around your body where it just molds around you perfectly, and it's the most relaxing thing ever. And it's freezing, and it's horrible, and the snow is just pouring around you, and it's completely muffling, and you can yell, but it just feels like your voice is going 2 feet. It's the most frustrating thing ever, but at the same time, it's magical. You really have that beautiful kind of snowstorm where it's just these big, fat, fluffy snowflakes falling down from the sky, and you are really excited as a kid because you know it's going to be great packing snow, and you can make snowmen and you can have snowball fights. And this album reminds me of how I felt in those times. This is just an album that makes me really nostalgic for my childhood memories, especially of playing in the snow as a little kid when all that shit was still magical and didn't mean that you had to clear the ice off your car and heat it up before you go to work. When I didn't equate that stuff with plowing the driveway or shoveling the sidewalk. This just reminds me of those innocent times, and just, I love it. I could listen to this back to back forever, and I really wish it was longer. That's why it's number 1 on my list today. This is an album that I just feel really gets to me, and it's unique, and it's dizzying, and it's memorable in so many ways. I am sincerely sad that this is so short. Not sure exactly when this is released. It certainly came out in April. I noticed it starting to appear in my searches sometime around this week. But anyways, give it a listen. Alright, now we're on to our honorable mentions, and I'm not going to talk too much about these albums. These albums are either in here because I felt that A, on a normal week, they would have actually been included on the list, but we had an exceptionally good week, or B, they were good and they deserve to be recognized, and I'd like to hear people checking them out, but I'm just not quite sure that they stand up to the rest of the things I included. So my number 1 is Tragedies by Mourners. Mourners have members of Eye of Solitude. And the reason this is an honorable mention is because, like, I just feel that this makes me want to listen to Eye of Solitude. It reminds me of Eye of Solitude, but it just kind of lacks the emotional depth that you can find on releases like Cenotaph or like Canto 3. Another honorable mention I have is Stolen Angelic Tongues by Auroch. Canadian death metal, good shit, really short. Would have been included any other week. It's just that, again, it's short and we had an exceptional week. So check it out. Again, that is Stolen Angelic Tongues by Auroch. Anyways, that's all I have for this week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed new releases. I'm definitely planning on making more of these videos, especially because I'm stuck inside and I really don't have a lot of other things going on right now. I think I'm finally figuring out how to film things. Like, I know the last couple of videos I've made have been like kind of shitty in terms of like the quality of the actual video itself, but I think I'm getting situated here. Next thing I gotta work on is finding a better way to record audio, so I'm on that. I think I've kind of found my sweet spot as far as filming goes. It was nice to catch up with you guys, and I'll see you next time.